Hey, welcome everybody to the Flipside Streamcast Live. It is Flip, as you all know. Happy Thursday to everybody here. We got the 4th of July weekend coming up. But before we do, we got a great guest today. One of my good friends. I've known him for a long time. Worked for him before, actually. So it's been a good time. But it's my friend James Tyler. Today we're going to talk about small business leadership with James. So how you doing today, buddy? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Are we freezing? We just went through all this stuff. Are we frozen? We may have frozen up. Uh-oh. Let's see. Uh-oh, James. What happened? We've never had this before. Let's see. Am I getting anything? Oh my God, it did. So his computer just shut down. So listen, I'll give you the background story about James as he logs back in. James has been around small business now for all of his life, got his MBA at UMBC, and is now living in the Cincinnati area, really helping out with financial kind of things, but came from an entrepreneurial small business background, and now has seen and kind of has definitely seen the issues and problems that small business faces. And when we normally talk about leadership, we normally talk about the people involved in that. And James has seen that not only firsthand, but he's also seen it from a business perspective about what that means externally to your external kind of stakeholders, and as well as internally. So today it'll probably be more focused on the external piece of the puzzle, because James has seen a lot about that to know. And good morning to our LinkedIn user, whoever that is today. We appreciate you stopping by, and we'll get this here in a second going. But yeah, so James has seen that. He's had a lot of experiences with those things, a lot of international stuff as well. So as we've had this really global problem, and I would say, let's see, how do I put it? We've had these global problems handling with logistics and everything else. Then what James's experience of having a global impact with a small business is obviously very true. So when we get our technical difficulties done, we'll get him on. I know C's trying to log on here on a couple devices, but you need to do your mic and your mini cam before I can add him. So there he's coming. Let's see. Boom! What's up, buddy?
Wow. Apparently, not every outlet works.
Yeah.
The computer was plugged in, and it just suddenly died. But now I've got
no worries.
To different. I don't know what's going on. It doesn't show that it's charging, so I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
So I hope this works.
No worries. Not a problem. Well, I gave you a good intro. I made you out to seem like you are the most amazing thing since sliced bread. So I'm hoping that now all of our viewers have you living up to that. But the truth is, I gave them a little bit of background about what really for small business and the leadership side of it, we normally talk about leadership as in an entity for a person to be. And really for you, I think one of your greatest perspective, and we had gone through some questions beforehand, your perspective on it all really, and I think today's focus will be a little bit more about the small business leading externally, right? And how it kind of, I mentioned that you had a ton of international experience, and you've been all over the places, markets that are friendly to us, that are not friendly necessarily to us. Right. But really from that side of it, I think today's focus is that it's going to be. But so now that you're back to things, doing good, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about it, but I think I did it a little bit. So, but yeah, so how you doing today?
Good. You can hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I ran a small business for 12 years, between 2007 and 2019 when I finally left. And yeah, as you said, we did a lot internationally, both from a supply side with different manufacturing partners in Asia and the Caribbean. And we had customers in Europe and all over the US. And so there was a lot of different cultures. And, different expectations in each sort of case.
Yeah, so I guess so. I'll start you off with a huge softball, right? Get you back in now that we've had the little technical thing. So, if I said to you, look, James, if right off the top of your head, elevator speech, right? Like if you were to go to a cocktail party and someone walked up to you and they're like, dude, what are the real small business pitfalls that people fall into, right? And taking it from a perspective of a business as a whole, not necessarily just the leader, but the leadership of that. Since you sat in there, what do you think those pitfalls would be?
I would say one of the most common ones that came up when I was running a small business. I was part of a roundtable with other small business managers and owners, and always we would talk through challenges and different things people had done. And one of the common themes seemed to be that most of us were too involved working in the business instead of working on the business.
Okay.
And when you're working on the business, you're able to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and try to be an actual leader, which is driving the vision and the culture, as opposed to a manager that's involved with the day-to-day. And in a large business, you go on a website, you'll see who the executive leadership is, and then you'll see who the managers are, and the managers are executing, and the leaders are setting that vision and culture.
Yeah, it's that delegation and empowerment, right? I mean, I think that's what you're probably getting.
Well,
I never heard it put that way, but yeah.
Well, and the challenge is, as a small business person, you have to be a bit of both.
Right.
You can't be just the leader, just the manager. You have to find a way to do both. And it's very easy to get in the weeds and stuck on the day-to-day. And when you're doing that, you can't see the big picture and see where the company's going.
Let me ask you this. You had mentioned the roundtable. Did you find that when you sat at the roundtables and you sat with those groups as small business owners, did you find that it helped, or did you find that it was, and I know it probably does, right? But on the level of like seeing how people run their own stuff, what was the benefit, I would say, of seeing that in the roundtable from a leadership perspective?
Well, I can tell you that some of these other people in my roundtable would talk about different partners they were using for various functions of the small business, right? So when you're a small business, for instance, you don't really require a dedicated HR department.
Right.
Yep. However, there are certain HR rules that an HR person would know. Things like having an I-9 for every employee, which is mandated by the U.S. government. And I can tell you, we didn't have them for a long time, but I wouldn't have known that level of detail in HR. So one of the things I found was they were using a sort of an outsourced HR firm that would come in once or twice a week, and they acted as your HR department. They would come in and make sure everything's being done and help with hiring and even with culture and setting up employee manuals and employee communication. And then, there were firms that would do the same thing on the finance side. You can't have your own CFO, but you can have somebody come in making sure the data is being input correctly and that the system is generating reports that provide useful information to a leader to make decisions about the business.
Yeah, because I think intrinsically, right, you want to do what you're good at, right? Your core of your business, we want to do X. And I think and we got into this conversation, and everybody knows this. We usually get on 30 minutes before, and we make sure that how we're gonna flow stuff. And James and I got into the conversation that you get into your core, and as the CEO or as the founder, you really love your core. That's why you're doing it, right? I love this. This is beautiful. This is what we want to do. And then all of a sudden, you kind of, wait a minute. There's all this. Well, taxes are going to come. The financials are going to be there. But then you're like, wait a minute. Now, what do you mean I gotta talk about healthcare, or what do you mean about a 401k, or what do you mean about Paycom, or whatever you're going to do? Like, and I think talk to that a little bit of like, can that be overwhelming for small business as a leader, that your time is focused off other things? Is that?
No, I think it's an important part, actually, of being the leader. And if you want to invest in your employees and you want them to know you're making an investment in them, then finding the time to learn about those programs, like the options for healthcare, whether we get dental and vision, and whether we offer a 401k program, and whether we offer a match on the 401k. Um, those are the sort of things that are important to show that you are investing in the people.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be an expert on any of those things, but you're going to have to. I mean, you have to ultimately make a decision. But you're going to have to get the input from various people. And if that is something with a 401k plan, you talk to the 401k administrator. If it's a decision about the business, then it's important to listen to your colleagues as well, as even though the leader is going to be making the decision and held accountable for the decision, they need to be a good listener and get the input and the diverse points of view from the people that are probably going to be doing more of the execution. Because if the order comes from the top down, it tends to be far less effective than if it's a collaborative decision and then everybody's invested in it.
Yeah, homegrown, coming from the roots, right? Yeah, it comes from the people. That I guess leads to another kind of a good thing about, and you and I had talked a little bit about it. It was the ability to delegate when you're wearing so many hats, right? Because you could be a CEO, you could also be the CFO, you could be the COO, right? The three big ones really, and then your business still doing, you can be a really substantial amount of earnings just knowing that you have that, right? There's plenty of small businesses out there with less than 10 employees making well over six figures. So I guess, how did you see when you had to wear so many hats and delegating? What was it? Because you had to balance micromanaging and not wanting to do that, but also empowerment. How do you think that is the best and the best way that small business leaders could do that?
Well, I think most people would agree that micromanaging is not a long-term
no, not at all.
Option, nor is it usually successful.
Yep.
Like you said, you really want to empower your employees, but that takes time. So when I was at my small business and we had a new employee come in, I would want them to be able to make decisions, but I wouldn't expect them to be able to make the decision I would make right away. So whenever there was an important decision, I would sit down with them and with the whole team and not say what I think we should do. I just tried to sort of foster a discussion about what are our options and what do we see as the positives and minuses of those decisions, or the potential ups and side and downside.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And you and I have talked about this before, where we have especially when you have levels of a small business that have a blue collar component to it and a white collar component. And I say that in the sense of saying like if you got to do the taxes, you got to do the HR. Those are very admin heavy function type things, white collar type of stuff. But if you're running an operational business or a manufacturing side or whatever it was, you get very much blue collar things. And I think your point's great, right? You get around a boardroom, you get around a table, and you say, hey, listen, I need you to see my points from the leadership side of saying this is how these impact, but I want your impacts of saying, hey, this is also, I need to hear what you guys want, need, and then we can kind of bounce those off of what is. Somebody's not going to be right. You're trying to find the most common ground you can to say this is the best for us as a business as a whole, and this is the best that we can get for you guys and what you guys want, right? And there's usually a compromise in there.
Sure. I mean, it's important to get that viewpoint from the operating person, because if the leader, the manager, just tells them what to do and it can't be done, and the leader or manager is blissfully unaware because they're not the expert on that piece of equipment or whatever it is, then it's just going to cause problems. And so you have to have that input.
Yeah, and I think another thing that plays into that too, and I've seen it in businesses before, and I know there's two sides of this. There's times when you get inserted into the white collar space without having worked on the blue collar side, right? And then there's work that you have homegrown people that you grow up through that blue collar thing, and then now they're in a white collar kind of position. And again, we're using these terms as not negative. It's only to kind of talk about them in two separate spaces. I would argue with you, and I don't think anything wrong, that the people that are doing the gritty blue collar jobs probably don't want to do, like, I don't, like, people say all the time, I don't want to be in the spotlight. I don't want to make those. That's not my. I don't want to deal with that crap. Like, I don't want to deal with the paperwork. Right? It's the paper pushers type stuff. So that's a good one. So let me get into this then, and kind of tying it to what's going on in the world. So, and I had mentioned to our viewers, you are right now, you're very much about reading and kind of investing yourself and the knowledge about what's going on with businesses across kind of the world right now, with what's happening with at least in the United States, inflation, with the war going on, with post-COVID, all those things. That is something that you're specializing in and looking at investment into those businesses. So I guess one of the questions I want to kind of give to you and for our listeners would be, like, if I take a small business, how did I have to, in a global economy, which is what you were involved in, how does a small business lead other kind of small businesses, right? Because there's a leadership within your own world that you control, right? I control X business, right? I control X spectrum business, and we're going to make these whatever. Cool. Now, how do we now take that, though? And you have a logistics background where you understand about that piece too. We have a logistics problem right now in the world, in the United States. How could you see one small business leading other businesses kind of in that retrospect?
You mean from a logistics standpoint?
I mean, I was using logistics because that was your special. That was a little bit of your specialty for it. But I mean, but so in general,
yeah. I mean, really, when we would have, and the funny thing is about the company I ran, some of our biggest customers were small businesses. They were entrepreneur founders and had built a great business, and we, were supplying them the bulk or majority of their components for their systems, and we didn't want them to have to worry about the logistics because it is time consuming. But what we did have to do is try to educate them on the considerations. So when you're shipping something before COVID, when you're shipping something from Asia, it's understanding when it leaves the factory how long it takes for it to get on a container, onto a boat, and how long it's going to take to hit our shores and clear customs and then move across the country by train or truck, however it's going to get there. And that way, if we could help them sort of build in that thought process, they still didn't have to deal with the logistics, but they could take it into consideration when they were making decisions on inventory, on, how much do I buy now versus, and planning, essentially.
Essentially, you're managing your expectations. You're managing their expectations, right? In a sense, though, leading them and saying, "Hey, just so you know, that's probably not smart to do because it's probably going to take X, Y, and Z," right? So it's external leadership that you're kind of right with a colleague of saying, "Hey, I'm scratch my back. I'm here to scratch yours," type of a deal of saying, "This is where kind of we can help you with that," right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's a good piece of the pond, or excuse me, the pond. Well, about to talk about the pond, but it's a good piece of the puzzle to it all. And in today's world, would you say, so you said pre-COVID, post, and with what's going on in Europe, are we now, that needs to happen even more, where businesses need to unite in that way? Or is that?
There's really no business, large or small, that's going to be immune from the effects of the shipping industry right now and the logistics industry. And we've seen the pictures of all the container ships, sitting out in the ocean off the coast of LA for weeks because they couldn't get into the port. And a number of large companies ended up actually arranging their own planes, their own ships entirely, not just, the containers on the ship, but actually just getting a ship and handling it themselves and going into a less congested port. And it's just a really huge challenge, but it will eventually resolve itself. Either because the system shut down, right? And
Right.
the way our world works, you just can't have that happen without a massive fall-on effect,
Right.
right? It's just the world is constantly in motion, and when that stops, this massive backlog. We don't have a system for that. There's no slack in the system that allows for that kind of immediate increase in capacity that we need, particularly in logistics, because why would you keep a lot of extra expensive capacity in the form of ships?
Right.
So, it'll either resolve itself because the backlog resolves and people stop buying as much, and then it just works its way out, or somebody's going to eventually create a solution to it. And
Sounds
if
like
the
a business
solution,
opportunity.
if the solution is building more ships, the problem is when you build more ships, the pendulum tends to swing both ways. So,
Right.
What'll happen is things are going great. Things are going great, and then 2008 hits, and they're taking a lot of their ships and dry docking them because they couldn't fill up the ships, so they wanted to cut capacity.
Right.
And by doing that, they made people again get back to competing for the limited capacity, keep prices stable, which is important for them because we need shipping companies and logistics companies. And then as the economy goes back to growing, then they can add capacity accordingly. But it usually happens in a more sort of gradual way. And what happened with COVID, nobody's ever experienced. So there's no way to prepare for it.
Yeah, and we didn't have the infrastructures that we do in place, which is interesting, right? Because when the Spanish flu hit back in the day, we didn't have the infrastructures that we do now. It was a covered wagon. It was
we
wagons
didn't have international
moving.
shipping.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, you were getting stuff. I mean, they did. Like we were still exporting. The South was exporting cotton. I mean, we still had things, but it wasn't. It's not what it is today, which is
wasn't nearly as interconnected.
There's no DHL, right? Like there's not a DHL around doing stuff, right? And that's an interesting point. So speaking of, and you kind of said large business, I think this is an interesting point. It's been something, and I'll bring up my example that I've had forever, and I always use it up. But when you're a small business and you're talking about leadership and you're playing in a big pond, right? When I mean that with a lot of big businesses, but you may be some little niche in the market that's, hey, it's important, but you're the underbelly for things. I guess the question I have is, what are those? Is there a difference that you see in the small business leadership realm that you needed, or tactics that you had that were kind of different when you knew you were playing with the bigger companies?
Well, when we would be working with large corporations, and these would be companies $5 billion plus, and very, very large. They have very sophisticated systems and processes in place, developed over 100 years or more.
Right.
And what, as a small business, you really have to be adaptable to that, because each very large corporation may have some very specific requirements on how you ship things, the barcoding and logistics processes, and how you invoice it, and all the exact right codes on the invoice. And if you don't enter it right, it won't get in their system. And so you have to be adaptable to that. And you also have to, what I found is, help nudge them along the way a little bit. The issue we had with the large businesses is when they were trying to start a new program, and we would be supplying them a part, they would have to go through, and engineering would have to approve every single part before the purchasing department could go buy it. And there were just times when we would be getting pressure from the purchasing department because they were trying to do their job. Everybody said, we need to build the inventory so we can get this product on the market. And the engineering people had not yet approved it. And when there's 14 or 15 people in that sort of more bureaucratic system,
you end up being an interpreter.
Yeah, and you can't get upset with them, but you have to say, like, we couldn't possibly run this because if we didn't make it right, you would still be responsible because it wasn't approved for production. And that's one thing, is there's a polite way to do it, but also to let them know that they need to follow their processes before we can move.
It's interesting that you bring and that a company can get so big, and we've seen it before, where as a small business who's a part of that, right? And a lot of large companies work with a ton of, right, small businesses for their things. Amazon's one of them, right, that works with a ton of small business to do stuff. It's funny when you as the small business have to educate the larger company on their own business practices and how it really needs to work, right? And you would think that those 15 departments would talk to each other, but it boils down to the ground level. Who's the expert at what they're doing? They're the expert at maybe the reach, right? They have the reach. They've done it 100 years. They used to be a small business, and now they've grown. And now you're that small business. And I think you've brought this up a couple times, which I think is super important, especially externally. We talk about it internally all the time, but it's educating your customers. It's educating your customers. It's educating your stakeholders as to what you're doing. We talk about the why internally for leadership and say, hey, we need to teach you about the why to an extent, right? Whatever that is. I think a great point, especially in this global world. I mean, think about it. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when you and I started out, we didn't have the access that we do. We have more access now to the world than we've ever had before. And you were reaching all over the world at that point. But now you don't even have to. I mean, we used to be like, hey, let's get on a VidCon, right? Or whatever. But it's now like we're doing now. It's simple. Like you still were, and I can remember. Like, so I'm going to bring up a great story because I think it's a perfect story. So James's alarms business that they were working on, it was a big business. It was a small business, but it was a lot of revenue. And he asked us, me and another friend, we were working in ours. We were the experts in the field. And they flew us an economy. And I was like, wait, they're a really large business. Why are we getting flown an economy? I thought we were. And you told us the policy later of what was important of saying, look, if you're going overseas, that's a different story. Again, I was military, so I didn't. We just flew wherever we were told to fly. But I just thought it was like, man, but it was just a funny concept. And nowadays, you almost don't even have to have that. Yes, we still should shake hands. I'm a big believer in still looking someone in the eye, shaking a hand, right? That type of stuff is still, I think it's still important in a number of ways. But there's a way now to connect here, like we're doing, that has to be, I mean, it's a must now, right? I mean, I could save a ton of money by doing it this way instead of, I mean, departments have been obliterated and leadership has been obliterated because we don't need you anymore. We've got Zoom, right? Or I can do it on Teams or whatever the case. And so it's definitely a different world like that when you're playing across the globe, which is what you used to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think the Zoom calls, while people did it at the beginning because you couldn't travel and it was more of a safety issue, I think people quickly realized it could also be far more productive and far more efficient. Not necessarily as effective, but certainly efficient. Because I agree with you that there's very serious value in face-to-face meetings. And I think it just shows when you're willing to go meet with somebody in person, particularly when you have to fly and travel there and take all that time, it just shows a lot of sincerity and the effort.
And you could make an argument now that if you do that now, you're even more saying, I'm serious, right?
Sure.
I mean, before it was like, I use my mileage. We got this for free. Might as well go. It's in Monte Carlo. Whatever. You can use whatever excuse you wanted. But now you're saying, okay, like whatever. Again, we don't get political on the show. I don't really care. But like you could be like, dude, I'm risking myself with like there's a bunch of things that you could put to it. Goes, dude, this company is serious because they've now invested this much into it. And rising gas prices, you can absolutely say that. So, well, that's good. So one more thing about here, and maybe internationally. I'm gonna stick on international for one more question about this, since you have this experience, and there are, again, with the access to the world that everybody has, right, more than any before, small business can easily find itself going international, right? You can have international customers because you're on Amazon and you put yourself on Amazon, and now you're having to ship across, right? Because people want your thing, whatever it is. But the question I had was, is when a small business works internationally, and whatever level you want to make that, doesn't matter. Have you found that there's leadership challenges that are different from just being domestic kind of based? And take out the notion of Amazon. I know I can ship to New Zealand to somebody, but if you're really working with international companies like that, and you're a small business, what are those extra challenges maybe that a big business wouldn't have, or that you saw are really important in the leadership realm?
Yeah, well, I would say the biggest thing is, and I think it's actually a problem all companies have in general, is if they're not conscious of the culture they're going into, then it can be difficult to achieve what you want to achieve. And I've seen it with large companies, I've seen it with small companies. If you're going to go do business in Australia, it's different than how you do business in India or China. And it's different how you're going to do business in the UK or France. So understanding, those cultures and how they do things, and will prevent you from rubbing them the wrong way. And when you're trying to negotiate something or find a middle ground, when you don't have that respect for the culture and how they do things, you can really start off on the wrong foot. But a lot of large companies tend to have the attitude that, we're the large company and you own our business and we dictate the rules. Yeah, it might just make the relationship a little more strained, and
Sure.
you
might get, but I mean, yeah,
they're not going to jump through hoops for you in the future,
right?
There's the relationship aspect in China, for instance, is huge, and it's very much you spend a lot of time with people when you go visit a factory or visit a supplier, a customer in China. You spend a lot of time together, and they're going to want to feed you a really big long meal, right?
Right. Well, if you're a foodie, that's good, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying, so what you're saying is, if you got stuff to do there, build in that relationship time that you maybe normally wouldn't with someone else.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can tell you wouldn't have the kind of lunch in the U.S. that you have in China, where you sit down at a restaurant, massive lazy Susan, and then they walk you to the fish tanks where you pick the different fish you're going to eat, and then it's all live, and then they cook it, and they bring you 10 different dishes, and that's what a lot of people in the U.S. I think would say, well, I don't have time for that. Let's just get on with it. And you have to realize that during that lunch, you're able to talk actually about more general things in business, or even family and other things unrelated to the business, but you're forging that relationship. And when you do that, you're much more likely to get cooperation.
A long term. I just had a client dinner not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, and my superior was like, "How did it go? Did we talk about?" And I was like, "No, we actually talked about kids and everything else." And I think he was surprised, but he understood. And I what I told him was simple. I said, "It's probably better we didn't talk business, because we can talk business later, but this was about really." It's about trust. It's about, and I think that's a great point for a small business, and take international out of it. Let's just talk small business in general. It's about trust, right? If you're a small business in a community, like you're a pizza place, people are trusting that you're making good food, and trusting that you're going to, be open in the last minute when the turkey dinner doesn't settle at Thanksgiving, and you're going to be there to get them a pie or whatever, or just whatever. Like, I think it's not lost, but it's definitely, you always go back to it, right? You go back to the fact of it being, as a leader, one of your externally and internally, right? You're getting a trust base with your customers, getting a trust base with your employees. It should be, and however long it takes you to do it, should be your number one goal, right? I mean, it should be, obviously it's selling and it's making a profit and paying people, but really getting that trust and building that trust with your base in either side is important, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's why it's so important to have their input on various things, so that you can determine, what the, for the small pizza place, I mean, the leader slash manager owner, the employees are entrusting that they're making sound decisions and not going to go bankrupt and not be able to pay them. And when the manager gets the input of the employees and the decisions made, then the input of the employees was considered, then they're more, invested and involved. And again, it's driving that sort of culture.
Yeah.
Because it's so important that the employees see that you're willing to step up as a leader when you really need to. You can't just never put a pizza in the oven. If somebody comes down sick, you should be able and willing to step in.
Yeah, that's the entrepreneur, right? It's yours.
Yeah. But if they, I've seen cases where they wouldn't want to step in. And so they just try to delegate it to somebody else who's already got a full plate of work. And it just doesn't help. And from time to time, they need to step in and lead by example.
I use the example all the time. I have a family member who's been at a business for 40 years and has the company that they work for has very rarely, and they're a very niche company. They're a very successful company, but they very rarely get input from employees. And when you're, I think the tendency is when you're successful, you tend to you tend to not worry less. So saying we're doing what we need to do, why would I go and do that? And I think that's the time is we talk about it all the time as a leadership, right? You challenge yourself. As a good leader, you need to hear the bad as well as the good, right? You need to hear that your baby's ugly sometime and what could be done. Now, you're looking at it from a different lens than the workers are. So you're looking at it from that wouldn't work because, or hey, maybe that can work and we can gain some, you gain some creds with your people. But they're very successful. They're so niche that there's really nobody else on the market, but they very rarely go to even their mid-level managers. They very rarely go to them and find stuff. They bring in outside people to do assessments and surveys and all this kind of crap. But, you find that you have a really high turnover of employees. You have a really high turnover of people that aren't satisfied with what they're doing. And, of course it's so niche that they're going to get more back, but it's sad because there's a lot of sour tastes left in people's mouths from it. And so that's not leadership, right? It's you and I. Well, I mean, it is, but it's a form of it, right? Whether that's good, bad, or toxic, which I talk about all the time. But yeah, so that makes sense.
One of the things the president of my alma mater says is that success is never final. And, that has driven the culture of my university to always improve and be better and to analyze yourself as a leader, to analyze your decision making. And I think if you sort of take the attitude that, well, it's successful now, I can take it easy, then, you risk having somebody else come in and upend your business. And you don't always have to be, say, growing the business, but you can always be improving it. And so having that attitude that success is never final, I think is a very healthy perspective and drives people to continuously improve.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple ways to do that, right? I mean, I could be wrong, but I think there's this steps approach where you get to a point, you plateau to make it perfect, you move up, you plateau again, right? It's a step thing, right? It looks like a step. The graph would look like a step, and I think a lot of people, and you've seen this, right, where in evaluating companies, which is what you do, you see a lot of people on this like very much triangular or angled plane of like it has to keep moving. And you and I just talked about this before, and I wrote it down, was you could get to a certain point with your business and it could be okay. Like you don't have to grow more,
because you found your sweet spot. And I know you wanted to talk about it a little bit, but talk about, I see it two ways, right? I see it like the side of a pyramid where, dude, if you ain't doing this way, you're in trouble. But I think it's better to step back, and it's almost a step of saying, it looks like a pair of steps where you're like, hey, we're going to plateau for a little bit, then we'll move up when we need to. And I think and I know you, and so everybody knows, and I didn't say this in the beginning, I will. James is one of the most, he looks at risk and really dices it up and says what it needs to be done. So when you answer this question, knowing that you are, not that you don't take it, not that you don't look at it and evaluate it, but knowing that, you're more of the Warren Buffett side. You're definitely one of the, not a disciple, but you're definitely on his thing. When you look at that, is it better then, especially in today's economy and inflation in the world we live in, do you think it's better for companies to look at only it moving up, like without, or is it okay now to have some plateaus where you kind of, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're, it really, I mean, the market can really dictate how high you can go. There's going to be some market for your product or service, and hopefully you have something that your customers can't live without. And that's what they're there for. And if it's niche, it's probably a good sandbox for a small business to play, but one that may not be interesting to a large business because it might just be too small for them. And so they can, I think one of the things is I think it's common to want to grow. I think it's sort of an inherent desire. People tend to think we need to grow, but I mean, I think when they step back, and it can be all consuming eventually, and also to grow the business, you take additional risks because there's usually a cost associated with that. There's how do you fund the growth? Do you take on debt? Do you take on more shareholders and sell part of your company? And if you're not successful in executing that plan, it could end up very badly. And I think when you have a niche and you can have a substantial market share of that particular niche, as long as you're servicing that well and you understand whether the service you're providing or product will be required in the future, or if it's going to become obsolete, then you can just manage it. If it's going to be, if this is something that's going to be there in the future and it's small enough that not too many people are going to get involved, then you can really just manage that. And then you get into the investing side, and with every decision, whether it's a decision to grow the business or an investment in the business, or using the company's capital to invest in another business where you're buying another small business, you certainly want to focus on downside risk. And protecting the downside is pretty much part and parcel for every successful business. I mean, they will forego more opportunities to ensure a huge margin of safety. And when you're a little more aggressive, you can get in trouble. Being aggressive usually means taking on debt. And when the market turns and the credit, market starts to tighten, if you can't refinance that debt, then you can very quickly go out of business.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think too, right? I think of it from a leadership perspective with what we're talking about, and I think about growth. And so I'll use what was in my mind while you were talking was, I take like a restaurant, right? And you get to a point, we'll talk about our neighborhood restaurant like we've been talking, and you now live in a place with some great restaurants right around you. Yeah. And so I think about those restaurants, and you say, you can only grow so much into the size, right? I can only have X amount of tables, and in a normal restaurant, hey, it's how many times, how long does it take me to turn over those tables and put more food on the table and blah 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 blah, right? It's a simple formula that's been written. It's hard to execute well, but if you have good food and good people, you can do it. Then I think about growth, and as a leadership, I think about, do I grow? Do I move to a bigger spot? Well, I may give up my my corner spot on the street that is exactly the reason why I have all the foot traffic. So do I really want to move into someplace else? Or I think about now, I've been watching, I don't know why I get into them all the time, but there's been a brand new Iron Chef out, and I've been listening to the chefs and their backgrounds who are on it. And you hear about them opening up a very different restaurant someplace else. So they're taking their reputation as a chef and what they bring, right? So the ambiance, the creativity, the parts of them that's good, they may be plateauing of saying, hey, we're gonna move this or in a different direction. But now they're saying to themselves, hey, I can take what I'm really good at, which is me being a chef, not necessarily the food I cook or the flavor of it, and now taking it to someplace else. And that's still growing, right? They're not, they're looking at it in a different way. And I think leaders, to your point, leaders just need to educate, right? You educate your customers, you educate your people. And if you have something, like you said, if you want to ultimately make something that people want forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's your cooking or what you become a brand, whatever,
Right.
it's that. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think, even as a small business, typically when people think of brands, we associate brands with large companies,
Correct.
Coca-Cola, IBM,
Yep.
Apple. But a small business can have a brand as well. And it's whatever that, and it comes back, I think, to really driving the vision and the culture and how that permeates through the business. And if everybody on the team is, bought into that vision, then it'll come through. And whatever that is, if it's great customer service or if it's, just absolutely never being late for a shipment to a customer or whatever it is, that should be sort of almost translated through your vision and culture, and it should come through in the operations.
Yeah, we've seen people all the time. We've seen this, and this too, of seeing big CEOs move from one spot to another spot, and it's not being like those two.
Yeah.
They're very different market sectors that they've moved from a CEO of one business to another, and they're moving not because of that they're good at that new whatever, right? It could be from moving from a Pepsi Cola place to to what an auto parts. I mean, I'm being extreme here, but the point is they're moving based on their reliability and to make things happen at a certain place, right? And so you could take a small business, for example, who says, look, we only use quality food and we only use, homegrown local stuff, in season food, right? And I know we're on food a lot, but I know you're a foodie. So you could take that and say, hey, we're going to do the same thing. And it may translate, but you need to make sure that then the brand for a small business isn't necessarily about their product. It's about the people behind it. So it's the culture. Our culture now moves into something else that I think is, we've talked about culture all the time on Lions Guide of saying, how do you build it? And again, and make an argument for me. I think it's better. I mean, ultimately, you need a product people want. But if people know that you've got the backing and you've got the people and you've got the customers, like if all those things are in place, you could move into a different sector and say, if you bring that same thing into it, your brand is really you and the people, not about what the product or service is, right? I mean, it obviously needs to be needed, but that's something for small business people to kind of look at. It's almost, correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost more important to have a really good core in that retrospect than it is to have the product in some. I know you need something to sell. I get it. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, to that point, you think about how critical Richard Branson is to the Virgin brand.
Right.
And how important Elon Musk is to the Tesla brand. I don't know, they become very much part of it.
Yeah, I mean, you got Tesla, you've got Boring Company, you've got SpaceX, right? I mean, it's very visionary. He's done visionary for all of them of putting it out there, and everything else aside, we keep all the Twitter and whatever.
Flamethrowers.
Yeah, we have people are eccentric. I get it, right? Whatever, right?
That can lift 7 pounds. Amazing.
So, but the visionary thing is where he's taking things is part of him, right? It's part of the saying, I'm going to take Tesla and have this vision to do what X, Y, and Z. I'm going to take SpaceX and we're going to get to, I mean, those are look, those are things you can grasp onto and go, shit, we're going to Mars. That's my one for the day. So we're going to Mars, or we're going to have a bunch of cars that the fight may be that it's 1,000-pound battery and it takes more emissions to make that than it does to actually have it. What I don't even want to argue it, but there's visionary stuff that's there that is it's good. I mean, it's good for in a whole, but a small business can take that too, right? And say, hey, look, how do we affect our community? And I think that's the steps, right, for a small business and the leadership within that to say, hey, we're going to be the best at this in our community, and wherever that grows to, it grows to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's very much on the leadership side is thinking about the role the company plays in the community. So not, and to all the stakeholders. And, when you're putting your manager hat on, you're much more involved in the day-to-day operations. But it's when you spend time on the leadership stuff where you start getting into thinking about the brand and the culture and the vision. And it's important. And
let me ask you this. We got back to, the differences between the managers and the leaders, right? And I'm, me, I'm 1,000% with you on that piece. Did you find it, it's a good one. Did you find a battle rhythm for yourself, or was it easy to find a battle rhythm for yourself to knowing when to insert yourself, when not to, when to wear the hat? And was it distinct for you to say, okay, I need to take this hat off? Maybe this is internally in your office saying, I'm not wearing this hat. I'm taking this hat off when I make this decision. How did you play with that within your employees? Does that make sense? It's like, because you can wear many different hats and,
and when you're going back and forth, it's not easy. I mean, what most people tend to do is fall into too much being the manager and micromanaging,
right,
and not spending enough time. And one of the things you have to do is just step away. I mean, if I was in the office, I was always going to be managing because people are going to be giving questions, and you have to set aside the time to be able to focus on the leadership side. But in order to be able to do that, you have to have an empowered group of employees.
Yeah, it's trust
that can make decisions and learn how you think about the decision. Because at the end of the day, we tend to focus a lot on outcomes, and I think it's just it's one of the mental shortcuts humans take is to judge a decision by the outcome, as opposed to judging the decision-making process and understanding that randomness plays a role and we can't control the outcome.
Right.
But if we make a sound decision, most of the time we're going to get a good outcome. And if we have a bad decision-making process, we'll probably get a bad outcome. But occasionally you'll get unlucky and you'll make a good decision and get a bad outcome.
Yeah, so something you keyed on there that I think is really important for our viewers, and you actually said it fast, but I think it may be the most important thing that you put out there. It's letting them know how you think about the decision process, right? As the leader, giving them insight as to your world, right? So I'm gonna use a soccer analogy. James is a big soccer guy. He goes to FC Cincinnati all the time. He knows I'm a huge soccer guy as well with the fams. I have always told people, unless you're a goalkeeper, right? And actually a goalkeeper probably needs to know about everybody else because they're the field general in my eyes. But I always told parents used to ask me all the time, well, my daughter plays mid. And I'm like, well, what else does she know? Well, she knows mid. Well, hold on. She either needs to know forward or she needs to know defense as well, right? So I think because it's one up, one down if you look at that on the field, right? And so you either need to know about the attacking third because you're going to be a part of that, or you need to know about the defensive third, and especially a midfielder, they need to know both. But I've always said, like, having to know, and I think your point of saying, as a manager, I need to know how my leader thinks and what they're looking at. And I may not need to know the details about it, but I need to give it an idea of it because it's going to influence then how I lead the people that I'm entrusted with, right? And as a leader, you need to know, kind of opposite, but in the same, you need to know how your managers operate and how their kind of feelings are, because you need to be able to dictate to them and be able to relate to them what your decisions are based on, so you're getting the correct information from them. I think that's a huge point that I know you said it fast, but I thought that was one of the most biggest things was they all need to know a little bit about at least how people think.
Well, it's just it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
People think differently, people learn differently. And that's why, you really have to be sensitive to that when you're trying to empower an employee and you're teaching them over time sort of how to handle certain situations so that you don't have to deal with it in the future, which allows you to focus on the business instead of working in the business. They, will all think about things differently and approach it differently. And depending on what they do or their past experiences, and just keeping that in mind, instead of just, it's almost like a teacher trying to teach all the kids in the room math the exact same way. Well, we all know that some people are going to be more visual or some people will be
Right.
more, auditory. So you have to adapt to that. And if you're able to do that and be compassionate to whatever their sensitivities are, whatever their methods are, and how they learn, then you're going to get that buy-in from them.
Yep, that's a great point. One of the other things I think you said, and we'll start wrapping up here, but I loved, you're gonna get it done. It's okay if there's a couple mistakes in it, right? If it doesn't get to the customer and your mistakes are internal, great, we can fix that, right? I reference a book all the time, and it's Endurance by Scott Kelly. He was the twin astronaut that stayed up in the space station for a year. And I read his book 3 times now. I love it. It's on Audible. He actually reads it to you, which is great too. And he talks about that NASA is down to like how long is something that you're going to do in there take. It's down to the minute about how long is it going to take. It gives you a little bit of leeway to try to do it differently. But it was so robotic that he said, he goes, one of the biggest things I learned from being on the space station was if 80% was going to be good and get it done, it's not that I tried 80%. I tried 100, but if I only got to 80 and it got it done, he's like, I knew there were days where I was going to have to give 110, 120% to get something done. He's like, and for me, that was about being in reserve and having that capacity within ourselves to do. And I think it's totally applicable to what you said, which is, look, we're going to get shit done. We're going to get it. There's my 2. We're going to get stuff done. It's okay as long as it's internal. We can fix it. We put a process in place so it doesn't to make sure it doesn't get out. But I think that's it's so important when you talk about compassion, right? It's compassion for that.
Well, it's and also you have to be tolerant that we're all humans and we all make mistakes. And when one of my employees made a mistake, it was a mistake that I could have made if I was doing that.
Right.
And rather than just go in and say, don't do it that way, do it this way, but to not both be on the same team as to why we're going to do it this way. It'll allow the mistake to keep happening because now it's almost like memorization. If they fundamentally understand why this process is better and how it helps them and how that helps the organization, then they're much more likely to do it that way because it's not just write it down, this is what I do. This is why I do it this way.
Yeah.
And that understanding is important. But you have to educate them on that. And you have to also be able to say as a leader, it's okay to not know, as a leader, as an employee, and it's okay to make mistakes. You don't want to see the same mistakes being made. You don't want critical mistakes, but mistakes will happen. And as you said, they will be fixed. But, coming at the employee with a sort of a harsh attitude, and it's more of a disciplinary style than a nurturing style, I think, does not build a very healthy culture. And it makes them afraid to make decisions because they'll be afraid of getting it wrong and the consequences of that. You should expect them to do things that you may not have done that that you would consider a mistake. But if you had not educated them on how to make that decision, then you should expect it.
Yeah, I think education, it's a beautiful point, right? Setting expectations. So another one that I think people don't do as much as they should, set your expectations early. They don't have to be super stringent to be an expectation. You can set an expectation for employees. Because listen, you're going to hire, be honest, we're going to hire people that fit our culture, that we, at least from our initial things, we're going to look at their education, we're going to look at their experience, we're going to hire them because we think that they fit their culture. Makes total sense, right? And then all of a sudden, though, the expectation still is that they're the newbie. They don't know, though we think that they'll fit and we like their skill set, we have a different way of doing business than other people do in whatever business you are. So I think your point is totally valid to be able to say, look, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay that that's going to happen. Put processes in place so it maybe doesn't get to your customers, right? Which is your ultimate. We can't ever let this get to the customer, whether that's a pizza and it's been dropped on the floor, whatever it is. I hope we don't drop people off 5-second rule, but whatever that is, put those in place so they have room to grow, because you said something that I think is super key. You don't want them to be in fear, right? Mm-hmm. The worst thing you can do is have somebody in fear about, what if I make a mistake, then I'm going to get whatever. And we had that one hit rule in the Navy for a long time where it was a be perfect or be out. And it's one of my regrets. I put a chief out and I shouldn't have, I'll be honest with you, a long time ago. And he was a great chief, good guy, even pros to us. Look, I made the mistake, got a DUI, but it was a no defect Navy at the time. So it would have been very much against the norm to do. And I wish I would have thought more about it. But I think you're right. People can't be afraid to make a mistake or whatever. And you hope that they're not catastrophic. You hope that they're not damaging. But you know what? Here's the thing. You lose a customer. One, you make it right and you gain 5 more, you gain 10 more because of that lesson that you've now learned, or that workflow, or that process that you've put in place for it. That's the way to think about it, versus, man, that you just lost us a customer. I'm about to lose you. That's not today's day and age. That's not the way we just can't.
Well, what we found with our customers, large and small, is that when we had made an error or not lived up to the expectations, they were upset.
Right.
But it gave us an opportunity to make it right. And if you can make it right quickly and get things back on track, they will remember that.
Yes.
Probably more than they will remember that you just always giving great service. And that's just, now they see that, you've taken accountability and you've taken steps to, you're basically seeing their side. You're saying, we understand, this is what you need, and we're going to get it done one way or the other. And if you do, then they will really remember that, and it will cast a very good light on you. Because, large companies make mistakes too. I mean, if you just look at, we talked about logistics earlier, most large companies, particularly anything to do with manufacturing, the automobile industry, for instance, has operated on a just-in-time inventory and manufacturing method for many, many years. And they've been able to do that because there's never been a massive disruption in the logistics chain. There might have been disruptions at their supplier, things got late, but there was virtually no slack in the system because they wanted the parts to arrive to their factory, in the case of automobiles, maybe only hours before it's going to be assembled into a car. And there's just no room for error, right? And then you have the logistics issue. And now people have to think through, while just-in-time is amazing, we don't have to hold inventory. We quickly convert it into cash. It's better for cash flow. They have to think through, but we have no margin of safety.
Yes. So I wrote something down that I'm going to take away from this, and it's in the highlighter mode on the top of my thing, and it stays with me. And I may actually so I made up, and my viewers know this, James. I think you do too. Honesty, consistency, and transparency from the top down builds trust, loyalty, and respect from the bottom up. Right. I made that up 2 years ago that I thought was good. You just made me think about another one that I think is really, I haven't heard it before. We may have come up with a new one between you and me. I will not credit my full self. It'll be James Tyler and Keith Griffin's quote. But mistakes allow you to show your customers something that's not on the menu. And I think that's so important, what you just said, of saying, like, look, you may have seen, and your menu could be anything. It could be your car parts. It could be on your actual menu, right? But I think it shows, we just automatically assume I'm going to buy something. I'm going to get it on time. I'm going to get exactly what we need. Getting a mistake and fixing that mistake shows your customer something that's not on your menu that they only assume is supposed to come with it. And you get to show that. Mm-hmm. I think that's an opportunistic thing for people to do. I think it's a way that leaders can look at mistakes being made in their company. Do they need to fix them? Yes. Do they need to address them? Yes. Do they need to educate their people and hopefully it doesn't happen again? Absolutely. But I think if you look at it as an opportunity to show your customers something not on the menu, you have just, I mean, like you said, you've just, man, I know this guy, if I know this company, if they screw it up, they're going to make it right for us.
Yeah.
And I think
that's big. That's big.
Huge, dude. That might be my new one, buddy. I might say that from now on, just because. So, and I'll credit us both. Well, good. Listen, we've been on 106. If there last thoughts, give me some last thoughts. Small business leadership. Give me your wrap up of what you're thinking about, and we'll wrap this thing up for this week.
Yeah, I think probably just the original point, when you're leading a small business, you have to be both a leader and a manager. They're different roles and responsibilities, and not falling into micromanaging and getting too involved in working in the business, but spending that time working on the business and being a good listener and making sure that decisions made in the business are collaborative, because if the directive comes from the top down, it's usually dead on arrival. Whereas even if the leader already knows the decision they're going to make, they should still get the input from the team so that they have that vested interest and they're invested in it.
Absolutely true. Great words. Great words. Well, listen, my friend, thank you for stopping by today. I appreciate it. We had the first technical, listen, I got a new saying now that I love. We worked through a technical difficulties, which I've never had to do on a streamcast before. So that box is checked off, being able to handle that. But then again, more importantly, your insight, I think, to small business, and I know your experience from it personally, to know that you have a huge insight. I know you look at businesses now, and those are things that you don't just look at numbers, you look at insides of the businesses, of where your insight's coming from. So I absolutely appreciate you stopping by. I'd love to have the chat for you. Glad to have you here. Thank you. You're welcome. Absolutely. So listen, for our viewers, next week, Laura's going to be on. Obviously not a new co-host anymore, the co-host with me on the rant, and we're going to talk about change fatigue. So we have so much change going on with everything that's happening, and can your people get worn out? Is it we strive for businesses pivoting now? That is a key attribute that investors look for, is are you able to pivot and change because of what's happened? But what do you got to do for your employees, right? Is it resiliency-based training? Is it, what do you need to do? We're going to talk about that next week. So glad to have you on this week, James. Again, thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it. Everybody else, have a great weekend. Have a great 4th of July. Last but not least, flip out. We'll see y'all later. Thank you so much.